Okay, it really is working this time. So, I'm not going to introduce this again because I'm going to go crazy otherwise. Act 4, Scene 2, Othello's famous speech about the degeneration of his psyche begins with these lines. Had it pleased heaven to try me with affliction, had they rained all kind of sores and shames on my bare head, steeped me in poverty to the very lips, given to captivity me and my utmost hopes, I should have found in some place of my soul a drop of patience. But, alas, to make me a fixed figure for the time of scorn, to point his slow, unmoving finger at. Yet could I bear that too, well, very well. But there where I have garnered up my heart, where either I must live or bear no life, the fountain from the which my current runs, or else dried up, to be discarded thence, or keep it as a cistern for foul toads to not engender in. Turn thy complexion there, patience, thou young and rose-lipped cherubim. Aye, there look grim as hell. I hope my noble lord esteems me honest. Oh, aye, as summer flies are in the shambles, that quicken even with blowing. O thou weed, who art so lovely fair, and smelt so sweet, that the scent aches at thee, would thou hadst ne'er been born. Alas, what ignorant sin have I committed? Was this fair paper, this most goodly book, made to write whore upon? What committed? Committed? O thou public commoner, I should make very forges of my cheeks that would to cinders burn up modesty, did I but speak thy deeds. What committed? Heaven stops the nose at it, and the moon winks. The bawdy wind that kisses all it meets is hushed within the hollow mine of earth, and will not hear it. What committed, impudent strumpet? By heaven you do me wrong. Now, there's a lot going on linguistically in this particular speech on the level of figurative language, which is why we've chosen it as one of the close passage analyses. Now, one of the key things to bear in mind is the overall one of the overall abstract conceptions of the way to read this particular passage is that this passage marks his hypothetical ability to deal stoically with the suffering from which he is sprung. So the opening of this, had it pleased heaven to try me with affliction, is him hypothesizing about potential suffering that he may have undergone, potential suffering that he could deal with, in order to contrast it with the reality that he is undergoing and that he is experiencing and that he can't deal with, i.e. Desdemona's infidelity that he thinks has happened. So what we're seeing here is the breakdown in that stoic identity that he has cultivated throughout his life in Venice, and his relationship with Desdemona has been the chink in the armor of that stoic identity. And that's where the logic of some of these metaphors that structure his speech originates from. Now, what you'll see as we go through this are what we would call aqueous or fluid metaphors, extended verbal patterns that are to do with water, that are connected to water. And I think that liquidity is deliberately related to this sense of control that Stoicism invokes, being able to rein in your feelings, to trap them, to control them, to move them in the way that you want is the sort of Stoic ideal. And the water metaphors that are reworked in this passage speak to that overall desire to, or that longing for lost control. So he opens this speech with this invocation. Had it pleased heaven to try me with affliction, had they rained all kinds of sores and shames on my bare head, steeped me in poverty to the very lips. Now this opening line, I think, is a biblical allusion to the book of Job. He is invoking the situation of Job from the Bible and the punishments that he undergoes in order to partly testify to his faith in the Almighty. He is there drawing attention to a hypothetical reality that he believes he would be able to deal with. I would be able to undergo the sufferings and the trials and the tribulations of Job from the Bible. I would be able to deal with those punishments, but I can't deal with this violation of my stoic control. He can deal with punishments because that is precisely the way in which you would reveal your stoicism, is by dealing with forbearance, with trials and tribulations and pain and suffering. So had it pleased heaven to try me with affliction, had they rained all kind of sores and shames on my bare head. that image itself is synesthetic. It's an example of synesthesia, raining sores and shames on his bare head. So you've got this idea here of him being covered with physical wounds and abstract wounds, the sores and shames on his bare head. And I think, again, that final image gives us a sense of vulnerability in the face of God. It gives him this sense of vulnerability that is so provoked throughout this play, despite all of his military achievements and his bravado. But raining sores and shames blends those sensory domains of the physical sense of touch and the abstract sense of cognition, of understanding shames. Had it pleased heaven to steep me in poverty to the very lips, again, a pattern, a verbal pattern that is connected to water. He's had sores rained upon him. He's been steeped in. He's been soaked in poverty to the very lips. Had heaven given to captivity me and my utmost hopes? Had heaven trapped both myself and my desires? What you see here, steeped me in poverty to the very lips, is this, again, this aqueous metaphor that he borrows on throughout this opening part of the speech, that he's drowned in suffering, in these hypothetical realities that he is describing that he may have been able to tolerate. I could tolerate being steeped in poverty, being soaked in poverty to the lips. Given to captivity, me and my utmost host is another example of that zeugma, that figurative device where a verb is referring to two different logical domains, two different objects in the sentence. Given me to captivity and my utmost hopes. There is literal captivity in that line, actually imprisoned me. But then also my hopes are being imprisoned in a figurative way. Zeugma is where you have a verb that creates both that literal and figurative connotation. I should have found some place of my soul, a drop of patience. So again, what you see there is the completion of that water fluid extended metaphor that in each case is about being soaked with suffering. And at the conclusion of that metaphor, him being able to command a drop of patience. And this is where this metaphor reveals this desire for control. Even if I had been afflicted by all of these watery shames and sufferings, I myself would have some form of ability to combat them in a domain that is linked to the sufferings themselves. They are both of their nature aqueous in this extended metaphor. So it reveals his desire to control what is fluid, what is uncontrollable. What you see then is an immediate contrast. But alas, to make me a fixed figure for the time of scorn. This is approaching reality now. We're out of the realm of his hypothetical stoicism. And we're now in the realm of, well, okay, this is not what I put up with. I didn't put up with all these extreme sufferings. I did put up with these, however, making me a fixed figure for the time of scorn. What we're talking about literally there is a kind of a trapped source of mockery. You're kind of someone that is mocking you. If you're fixed, you're kind of chained to the ground. Scorn itself can mock you. That alliteration in that example of fixed figure gives us a sense of that static fixity, of being trapped in vulnerability that we see in earlier scenes when when Iago provokes this by, revealing the way in which his stoicism has failed him at that time when he collapses in that kind of paroxysm of epilepsy. The time of scorn, the concept here is personified, scorn itself, in the same way that patience goes on to be later on in the passage. The concept is personified here because he experiences his paranoia about the attention he will receive and the mockery he will suffer as a result of Desdemona's infidelity. Scorn will point his slow, unmoving finger at him. So there's this sense in this accusation of slow, painful, or kind of transfixed suffering. And that slow, unmoving finger of scorn becomes a metonymical representation. It's a metonym. Remember that part that represents the whole. It's a metonymical representation of scorn itself, that slow, unmoving finger. And what we see then is that he cannot tolerate mockery. He can't tolerate mockery in the same way that he could tolerate disease and suffering and imprisonment and poverty. However, he's not done there. He says, "Yet could I bear that too, well, very well." And there's a syntactical ambiguity in this phrase here. "Yet could I bear that too, well, very well." That comma obviously creates a subordinate clause from well. That word well on its own is a subordinate clause, but the natural rhythm of that sentence, I think, asks us to read the phrase, "Yet I could bear that too well." I could tolerate that type of suffering really effectively, is what's being echoed in that phrase. That I think shows us his sense of attachment and familiarity to the toleration of tangible physical suffering, of poverty, of captivity, of affliction. He has learned how to master those things, but what he hasn't learned how to master is his love for Desdemona and his passionate feelings for her. But there, where I have garnered up my heart, and now this is where the metaphorical pattern changes briefly from water to the gathering of grain. Garnering means to gather up the products of harvesting and to store them in some place. And when he says, "But there where I have garnered up my heart," he means in Desdemona. So the place, this location where all of his value is in Desdemona. But notice that this is external from him. He has located all of his value within Desdemona. But where I have garnered up my heart is where he has collected himself and invested it in Desdemona to create value. But it is external to himself. "But there where I've garnered up my heart, where either I must live or bear no life." These antithetical statements here, there's antithesis in this phrase. I must live or bear no life. There is no position, there's no middle position, and that antithesis produces the tragic binary of this play, is that either he entirely lives within the realm of abstract value that he has invested in Desdemona and their relationship and all of the esteem that it embodies, or his entire identity is a house of cards that comes crashing down around him, and he cannot live through the tainting of those ideals. The final line here re-establishes that water pattern. Desdemona is the fountain from the which my current runs. So if we think about the connection between this metaphor, Desdemona is a fountain from which the current of his life runs. What you've seen in these opening lines are these water metaphors that give us a sense of him showing his confidence at dealing with a type of suffering because he has a drop of patience of his own. He is in control of his stoicism in those lines. But in that final line, Desdemona is the fountain. None of the value of his life originates from himself. It comes from her. She is the source. She is the source from which my current runs. His vitality and his sense of value runs from Desdemona entirely. Then we can start to see how we have those moments earlier on in the play when we commented on it in Act 3, Scene 3, where he finds out or believes in her infidelity and then begins to describe his entire life unraveling. He loses his military reputation. He loses his position. Well, this is why. Because he has garnered up his heart and channeled all of it into this fountain. Classical critics like Dr. Johnson, Samuel Johnson, the writer of the dictionary, took issue with this and called it a mixed metaphor. and said that it was confused. This confusion between gathering up grain and the water, the sort of aqueous metaphor that is established throughout this pattern. But I think it reveals an awful lot about his psychological dynamics and the way in which he has basically invested his entire identity in this relationship, and that his own feelings of value are entirely dependent upon that relationship for his source of well-being and for the continuation of his life. And he is not in control of this. He can't be. He can't control how his life is valued. And he acknowledges this. The fountain from which my current runs or else dries up. So there is no way for me to carry on if this source of value is destroyed.